Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. My day job is I run Did It, an 83-person digital-first marketing agency, and I have a nonprofit called Giving Forward in the cause marketing space. I'm pleased to be joined by Matt Kilmartin today. Matt's got a company called Habu, which is in an interesting category that I didn't realize intersects into marketing. So why don't you give us the backstory of sort of how you came to start Habu?
Sounds good. And thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on today. Super excited for the conversation. So Habu is a software company, and our software is used by both marketers and publishers. And the whole notion of what the software is it facilitates data collaboration. And that the product category that's emerging is a data clean room. And so back to your question, Kevin, of how Habu came to be, was so I've been working in data-driven marketing, data-driven advertising for a couple decades now. The last sort of material stint, last decade, was for the leading data management platform called Crux, which got acquired by Salesforce in 2016. And then I spent 3 years at Salesforce, which was an awesome experience. And at Salesforce, I had the privilege of working across all of their B2C clouds. So marketing, commerce, service, anything that helped brands with consumer data, and really had a front row seat to the tectonic shifts which were happening in our industry. And so a lot of the things which are quite commonplace known today, I had a sense back in 2018 that the privacy regulations were real and they were coming. We weren't going to be an industry of self-regulation anymore. That more and more power was shifting to the walled gardens, and they had posture around data and controlling so much data. And then lastly, just the sort of the infrastructure, which has fueled data-driven marketing and advertising for the last decade around cookies and identifiers and whatnot. With all these browser changes, the ability to sort of connect data was becoming very limited, right? And so that was the problem space by which we launched Habu into. I can go into a lot more specifics on the products and what we did, but the byproduct of kind of all these tectonic changes around walled gardens and privacy laws and browser wars is the data is distributed, right? And the whole premise for the last decade or two in advertising was that you could centralize data. And there's, of course, some data you can still centralize, right? Like your customer data, and you have a customer data platform. But your partner data, your media data, all this other data is distributed. So how do you come up with software to help in this next generation of distributed data? So that's a little bit of the backstory of Habu.
Cool. Well, yeah, it's interesting. You used the term data clean room, and I usually associate data clean rooms with sort of M&A transactions where potentially, there's a data room that you have access to, where you have access to sensitive information, also within litigation, right? So if there's litigation and there's sensitive information, they use these clean rooms. And one common thread for those is obviously really tightly regulating who gets access to what, as well as logging all the access. How does that end up applying to marketing data? The same concept.
Very similar. This notion of having neutral, privacy safe way to collaborate around data is common in other industries as well. In terms of marketing data, I'd say Google was really the first ones who sort of embraced a data clean room as a way to work with big advertisers, right? And so Google, back in probably 2015, 2016, basically said to advertisers, we're not going to ship impression level data back to you anymore. We're not going to give you these identifiers. We'll still give you access to campaign data, but we're going to make it available in this thing called Ads Data Hub, right? And Ads Data Hub is where Google will take all of the Google media data that an advertiser has, and an advertiser can show up and do analytics against that data, right? And effectively what it is it's Ads Data Hub sits on top of Google Cloud Platform, and it's built for data scientists to work in BigQuery, right? And so that was the posture that Google took, and that effectively is a data clean room. Now it's an industry data clean room and owned by Google. And what's interesting is Facebook and Amazon have done the exact same thing, right? So Facebook's version of ADH is called Facebook Advanced Analytics, and Amazon's is called Amazon Marketing Cloud. And clearly for both consumer privacy and also business interests, they're not going to let data work across those walls, right? And so that's, I'd say, really with Google, with Ads Data Hub, it used to be called it was called sort of a pilot project before that. We had actually worked on that, the beta for that with one of their largest advertisers at our last company. But that's really, I'd say, how it got started. And then the big shift we saw maybe a year and a half ago was data owners. And a data owner could be could be a big brand, right? It could be a large CPG, could be a financial services company, could be a big publisher, right? It could be an OTT provider, it could be a sports league or whoever, right? Big or very large publisher basically said, hey, I don't want to give everyone all of my data. I want to create a neutral, privacy safe way where we can collectively combine data or share data for the purposes of joint business outcomes together for data analytics, targeting, different sort of marketing use cases. So that kind of a long-winded answer, but that's really how data clean rooms and data collaboration, I'd say, came into this, into the ad tech, martech ecosystem. And it probably goes back to some of the moves Google made when they decided to stop sharing data with advertisers.
So I guess the question I'd have is on a technical level is obviously they don't want data to leave their individual sort of clean rooms, right? But the marketer has an interest in seeing the data commingled in such a way that they can sort of dedupe or append inside and make the data cleaner as a result of the commingling of the data. Is that something that you think will become possible, or because each of them sort of have their own rules about no, the data never leaves, right? And obviously, if the data never leaves, or it only leaves in aggregated form, not down at the impression level or granular level, it sort of leaves the marketer wondering, like, wow, there's a bunch of questions like I could answer if only I could get, everyone to agree that there was a Switzerland that was allowed to sort of have the data leave, into a central place.
My point of view is that, and you're right, you're spot on. Like, one of the big shifts that the walled gardens do is they don't let you do things at the user level, right? They let you do things sort of at the cohort level, where you can analyze, instead of having a single identifier, you can analyze groups of 100, for example, right? I don't envision a world in which you're able to start commingling data with Google, Facebook, Amazon together. I just don't see it, right? And so I think you have, so multi-touch attribution is 100% dead, right? It is, right? I mean, if you can't commingle the data, all the traditional MTA, like, it's not going to work, right? And so now that being said, I do think there's different methodologies you can do, both from sort of working with raw user level data and also doing tests and experimentation and whatnot. And I think when it's an industry clean room, right, when it's one of the walled gardens owning it, you're kind of working within their rules, right? And they do, for what it's worth, they do, Google now does this, where you can do targeting off of sort of results that come out of Ads Data Hub, but it's all in that sort of close ecosystem, right? What we're starting to see is brand, and what's interesting is the media data is obviously useful and important, but at the end of the day, who saw an ad, right? I mean, it's less important to a CPG than transaction data, right? And things of that nature. And so I think what we're seeing is, historically enterprises would build their MarTech data, ad tech stack with a bunch of different software companies, and a lot of the, Salesforce, Oracle, Adobe sort of have these marketing clouds, right? I think the next generation of next decade or so will be brands, and we're already seeing it. Like, we work with some very large brands, I would say, and I would consider them some of the more sophisticated sort of data-driven brands out there, where they're building almost like a purpose-built data ecosystem with their key partners, right? Whether it be people they do big sponsorships with, whether it be media partners, whether it be retailers, whether it be other CPGs, right? And so the walled gardens are going to do what the walled gardens are going to do, and people are going to have to live by those rules. but I also think there's just a ton of value in being able to collaborate with your data and get access to other data sets as well.
I guess to some extent, if the bigger brands are going to do that, right? Because obviously the investment is fairly significant in trying to take these data sources, commingle them, integrate with CDPs, et cetera. Does it create sort of a scenario where you've got the data haves versus the data have-nots, where mid-sized marketers, it's sort of beyond their capability, and so
Yeah,
there's sort of
it's a great
a
question.
digital divide within digital marketing?
Yeah, listen, it's a great question. I think the state of the market as it exists today, a lot of these tools are built for like data scientists, right? And our point of view is that how many companies out there say they have too many data scientists, right, to work on stuff, right? And so we've taken kind of a low code, no code approach to our software where yes, if a data scientist wants to load their instance of Jupyter Notebook and start writing queries against partners' data sets to do sophisticated sort of ML modeling on other people's data, absolutely support that. We've also taken the approach of like, what are some common things that mid-level marketer might want to be able to figure out? Reach, frequency, journey analytics, those kind of things, and sort of packaged up a lot of those analytics and queries into a user interface where more for the citizen user or an analytics person that's used to looking at dashboards as opposed to looking at a blinking cursor to write SQL, right? And so that's one question just in terms of like democratizing the utility of a data clean room, having sort of a no code approach. And the other question you asked though, in terms of data starved, data rich, like I think that's a function of the category you're operating in, right? CPGs are obviously on a big push to try to with D2C and try to get more first party data, and it's a wonderful move. All that being said, they're never going to have as much data as a retailer or a financial services company that has sort of that direct interaction, right? And so I think certain industries are obviously going to have different sort of data characteristics profiles, but I think having software that can sort of run the gamut in terms of different users, we think will provide utility for all types of companies. And we're seeing, by the way, like we are seeing success in retail, financial services, gaming, CPG, media entertainment as well. And so those are both people with a ton of first party data and some people with limited first party data as well. But let's be clear, like first party data is still king. CDPs make a ton of sense. And people should absolutely be investing in first party data. We just think our approach builds the first party data universe bigger and bigger, basically.
Right. Are there any sort of tailwinds or catalysts going on right now in the ecosystem that you think are really sort of pushing people in your direction, and sort of knowing, they want to get that extra level of data transparency. They want to get access to the data, but they want to be respectful of all the increasing regulations, et cetera.
So there's a couple things. I think that a lot of people, and I get it, right? Because there's like so much change happening. And quite frankly, like I was talking to a really smart agency exec today who works with a really impressive brand. And his point was like, yeah, I have this big presentation and like, they want me to answer questions that are unanswerable right now. Right. Like no, people don't know. Right. And he's probably one of the smarter guys, I think, in the industry. Right. But back, so I think there's a fair bit of like, woe is me, but what I'm seeing smart brands doing, be like, this is an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to try new stuff, right? To develop sort of task forces and try to try different things and innovate, right? Because we all know it's going to change, right? And I suspect you saw Google's news today where they delayed their deprecation of third-party cookies, which is I didn't see it coming. I think it's super interesting. It'll still come, but I still think it definitely sort of extends the timeline for people to figure out solutions. But back to your original question, tailwinds. The privacy stuff is, I'd say, a tailwind, right? Because the relationships with consumers is sort of utmost important. People value that relationship, and they want to make sure They're treating their consumer data with sort of utmost respect, right? And so it's sort of like a lot of like the generation one of technology companies that kind of do what Habu does requires you to take all of the data and give it to the technology company, right? And what we do, and there's some other sort of modern players as well, work with the data where it actually resides, right? So you don't necessarily have to take all of your data, upload it to a SaaS application like you used to have to, and like how some of the other players operate. We, if you know, if a CPG is on Azure and Snowflake, and somebody else is on AWS, we have the ability to sort of work across both those environments.
Interesting. You mentioned CPG and a bunch of other industry categories. Are there some real life examples where sort of the data clean room is in use and potentially provided an aha moment to a client that was material?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say one really cool use case we're doing right now is around sort of customer journey analytics, right? And so it's for an automotive company. Obviously, that's a considered purchase, and so it takes time. And what they've done is sort of worked with the trade desk, right, and taken sort of all of their event level data from the trade desk, and then what they've done is a lot of the mid funnel steps from a consideration perspective in terms of where people shop for and research for cars, right? They've set up environments with those partners as well, and so it's not just ads running on those sites. It's like, hey, of all these people that saw all of our upper funnel stuff on the trade desk, what sort of shopping behaviors are we doing, right? And then all the way down to the actual who's going to the dealer, right? And so that's like 4 different clean rooms there, collaborating across all those environments to understand what's the actual customer journey, right? And so that's a pretty interesting use case of getting a lot more transparent signal into sort of a lot of the mid funnel steps along the customer journey. That's one use case. Another really interesting use case is with CPG and retail, right? Where CPGs obviously spend a ton of money on marketing and want to understand what's driving growth at the register. And so, retailers exposing sort of transaction data so CPGs can, they might have sort of models or data sets to be able to run sort of queries against the retailer data to understand sort of how their advertising is ultimately sort of driving sales. That's been a great use case we've seen as well. So those are two that come to mind that are. I'd say what's interesting is the Google News, I think, actually will put. It definitely, I think everyone kind of let out a big exhale, right? But what I think for clean rooms, what it'll do is it'll actually make the activation use case be able to happen sort of at greater scale, right? Because if you think about it, if you don't have any sort of identifier, right, it's all about just first party ID to first party ID, right? And the fact that now there's this third party sort of identifier, and you have a little bit of time, sort of the activation between these two clean rooms you can do at greater scale. The use cases before that, a lot of them have been around measurement and analytics to date.
Well, yeah, we did kick the can down the road a little bit on the or Google kicked the can on the third-party cookie as sort of the common identifier. But there's always some loss of fidelity, particularly once you go into retail environments and you sort of can't marry up an individual consumer's behavior anymore to the media that they were exposed to. But one can, I guess, build a media mix model with an experimental design, do a fractional factorial method. And those require certain levels of scale to sort of, either just apply a media mix model based on what you had already planned, or go even one step further and do different things in different places so that you can actually sort of tease out cause and effect. Are people using your platform to do that?
Yeah, 100%. That's actually, I think, back to sort of generation one of the clean rooms. A lot of them was just overlap, right? Like said advertiser, said publisher, overlap, first party data. What we're definitely seeing now is people actually bringing models, right? Where they might have a propensity model or other types of machine learning models that they want to run on another partner's data set, right? And that's actually, we think it's a pretty significant breakthrough because the retailer obviously doesn't want the CPG. Let's just stick with retail and CPG. The retailer doesn't want the CPG to see the data, and the CPG doesn't necessarily want the retailer to see the model, right? And so being able to use a clean room to run models against the data set is a use case we've definitely seen for sure. So yeah, that's the interesting thing. There's just a lot of different use cases right now, right? Which is fun, right? And that's why I say I think that the brands that are sitting around on the sidelines, sort of waiting for the magical answer, is not the right approach. I think people who are like iterating, trying, experimenting, trying to sort of lean into some of these changes is definitely the better path forward.
Cool. One of the things, for a lot of the things you're describing, they work better at a certain scale and they start to break below a certain scale. Is there like sort of a sweet spot from an organizational size perspective where above that size, all of a sudden you reach statistical relevance more, to the point where you can start to have confidence in your results, or because obviously at the SMB level, you'll never get enough data.
SMB probably not. Actually, I hadn't been asked that question before, so I hadn't thought about it. But listen, but if a company had, I don't know, let's say they had sort of 1 million first party records or something like that, like that's pretty good, so I'd say SMB probably not. We're definitely, I'd say, working with sort of larger enterprises right now, but I think even a mid-scale CPG still spends a bunch of money on advertising and still needs to figure this stuff out, right? And they don't have any first-party data, right? And so yeah, I'd say sort of definitely sort of larger, medium-sized enterprises, I'd say, right. Who are working across a lot of places too, right? The reality is, if I'm a D2C advertiser and all I do is just work on Instagram and Facebook all day long, and that's the only thing I do, well, they're probably not a great fit because they're not, they might not have a need to collaborate with other people or whatnot. That's probably another criteria for sure.
Right. So the more data point sources and the more rich the data, it starts to make more and more sense to feed it into a clean room and find a single source of truth basically out of it.
But even the need, but this isn't even one of our customers. It's just another example I heard in the industry, which I thought was pretty interesting, was like there's a CPG who's pushing a lot right now on sort of plant-based products and sort of those types of ingredients, and they're working with I think it's like a music venue or something to sort of try to figure out people who sort of have affinities for those types of brands, music, right? And so there's just, and we've even seen CPG to CPG looking at sort of different flavor trends, right? So there's, I think if there's need to collaborate with partners to get additional data signal, then yes, definitely sort of a good fit. But I think you're right, multiple data sets, diverse data sets, working in multiple environments, those are definitely sort of good criteria to look through for sure.
Interesting. Now, obviously, you've got your own product roadmap and you're sort of thinking about what the future will look like. So how do you think data collaboration will change over the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it'll become mainstream, right? Listen, I was at Crux when we had 2 customers and we're just getting going, right? And everyone was sort of talking about a DMP, right? Every DSP said they had a DMP. Every ad network said they had a DMP. There was a bunch of standalone DMPs, a bunch of third-party data providers said they had DMPs. There was so many DMPs, right? But at the end of the day, there ended up being 6 of maybe any consequence, right? And it may be 5, whatever, we could debate that. But I remember back in 2011, everyone was talking about it, right? And we didn't know exactly what it was, right? But we were talking about it. We were getting smarter. You talk to customers, smart customers push you. You see competitors doing different things. this market feels the exact same way to me, right? Like it's being talked about, like, LiveRamp's talking about it on their investor call, right? Their product, and they already made an acquisition, right? You definitely see big companies, and there's startups. There's other startups as well, right? And then but now it's becoming a term. Now everyone's sort of saying they can do it. Every measurement company says they can do it. Every identity vendor says they can do it now, right? And I think we'll have a similar sort of shakeout. So to answer your question directly, 3 to 5 years, I think we'll have broad adoption. And this will be a key component in enterprises sort of marketing data technology stack around data collaboration, right? I think it'll be a sort of an integral part, sort of like how CDP is today. And even beyond that, I think and we've actually seen this a little bit, but I think we're super focused right now on marketing advertising, but the technology we've built has utility in healthcare and financial services and the government as well. This need to collaborate across data sets without other people seeing the data, to do it in a neutral, privacy safe way. Back to your original comment of what a data clean room was, like there's applicability in other industries as well. So I think that's ultimately sort of where it all goes, but that's what I think will sort of happen in the next sort of 3 years or so.
You mentioned sort of the early days of the DMPs when there were a lot of them and sort of everybody claimed that they had one, and that it feels similar now for where you guys are in the industry. That brings me back to those early days of DMPs, where many buyers were not sophisticated enough to really understand the differences between the players that were out there. And so a slick sales sheet and a good salesperson would end up closing business that really probably wasn't in the best interest of the buyer, right? So how should marketers avoid that problem as folks jump into your space and start saying, "Oh yeah, we can do that. We can do exactly what Habu does."
The good news is I think analysts are starting to cover it already, right? We've seen some analyst reports come out. We've talked to some analysts as well. I also think that you have to sort of like the services piece of it as well, right? If you think just about the sophistication of sort of data science back to like 2013, 2014 to what it is today in 2021, right? I mean, agencies have a lot of skills around this as well. So do consultancies too, right? And so back to like, how do you sort of find signal through noise? Rely on experts, on consultants, on agencies, on partners, on people like that, on analysts, right? And I think eventually sort of the market will sort itself out. And test too, right? Like that's another thing too. Like, I mean, you should definitely, it's interesting. I sort of saw this at Salesforce. I think sometimes people just sort of hit the easy button and think, yeah, the marketing clouds will solve this or whatnot, right? But there's not one marketing cloud who has solved the CDP problem, right? So I think people should. I think people should do their homework, pay attention to the analyst reports, and rely on experts. And there's plenty of people out there right now who are getting a lot smarter in the space.
So final question is sort of outside of your immediate space, is there anything else sort of really interesting going on in the digital marketing ecosystem that has you excited, where you're sort of like, well, that's pretty cool?
I think it's awesome just to see sort of ad tech back, right? There was a time where it was like a 4-letter word, right? And there's a lot of really interesting, valuable companies really sort of powering data-driven marketing and advertising. So I'd say the trend of just it's sort of it coming back, companies like the Trade Desk and Magnite and sort of other companies like that. I think it's awesome, because I think you need to sort of have alternatives just as the duopoly, if you will, right? And so I think that's pretty exciting. I think what's also pretty exciting is just this notion of like the consumer at the center of everything, right? I mean, I think people talk about sort of customer centricity and putting the consumer first, but I think these values of trust and I mean, I think you've been in this industry a long time, like, let's go all the way back to like the ad network days, and then sort of programmatic and sort of the advent of that. And I just think that there's going to be more and more sort of transparency. And I think a lot of companies and vendors are really putting treating sort of privacy as a first-class citizen and putting sort of the consumer at the center. And I think that's super, super important and needed, actually. So, so yeah, I think all these changes present a ton of opportunities for innovative new companies to bring sort of solutions to innovative brands as well. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think with change comes opportunity. And that's why I left Salesforce as well, is just because I knew that when there's this much change and this much chaos, you need innovation. It's just the cycle of innovation. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation right now. So
great. Well, I agree. There definitely is room for innovation. It's what gets us up in the morning, right? So
yeah.
Thanks so much, Matt, for joining me and chatting about the ecosystem at large and the Habu platform.
Well, yeah, it was a pleasure to meet you, Kevin. Really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to keeping in touch.
Great.